Hello, everyone. We are on with our weekly news hour from Ashoka, and today is International Women's Day. And I'm so excited to be speaking today to Jessica Sager, the co-founder of All Our Kin. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being with us. Everyone, my name is Constanze Frischen. I'm a leadership group member with Ashoka. And today's conversation is part of an Insight series on what's next for gender equity, supported by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And Jessica and I will be having a conversation for the next 30 minutes. After sort of half of the time, we open the chat, so you guys can type in your questions in the Q&A box that you should be seeing at the bottom of the screen, provided you're dialing in from your laptop. And yeah, but let's get started straight away and focus on you, Jessica, our guest today, and the topic of childcare, what's ahead, what's possible, and where we are. You are the co-founder of All Our Kin, a leading national voice on family childcare. You work across the US, you work directly with over 1,100 family childcare providers in Connecticut and in New York City. And these are mostly women who tend to live in overburdened, under-resourced communities, who open their homes to care for babies, toddlers, infants of their neighbors, also for children of parents who work in late shift. And you help them become successful entrepreneurs and enable them to offer the best care and education. So we want to go deeper into all of that, but I wanted to sort of frame this by saying two things that are important perhaps for everyone to know, especially for our international audience here. Early childhood education in the US, before the child is 4 or 5 years old, is not public. It's not free. In fact, it often costs a lot of money. So that's important to keep in mind. And then, Jessica, I was thinking before we get started, I was reading an article in the New York Times last week, which basically was saying millions of Americans work less than they would like to do, or not at all, because they cannot find someone to take care of their children. And in fact, it's one of the biggest reasons that American companies are struggling to find workers. So there seems to be a direct link between the economy, our domestic growth, and the question of childcare. And so, Jessica, for you, why isn't everyone caring about that? Why is that no one's make or break issue?
That is such a great question. That's a question that I and my colleagues think about every single day, because childcare affects all of us, right? We know that it affects children. Children's brains are built in the earliest years. We know that it affects parents. Parents can't work without childcare, and it especially affects women. It keeps women out of the workforce and costs them hundreds of thousands of dollars over their lifetimes. But it also affects us all. It costs the United States $650 billion a year in foregone productivity because parents can't go to work without childcare. So it affects every one of us every day as we think about economic recovery, as we think about justice, as we think about gender justice. And yet somehow, because childcare has child in the name, we think of it as being all about one child or one family. And I think for that reason, we avert our gaze from the importance that this issue has for each of us every single day.
And let's go deeper into sort of your core target group. I said this initially, but can you help us understand it more? We're talking about family childcare provider. So what does that look like? What is the reality of someone providing family childcare? What are the clients like? What are the children like? Can you paint that picture for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So, as we've established here in the United States, we don't have anything resembling a childcare system that parents can count on. And so what happens is that women, it's mostly women, in neighborhoods all across this country. And by the way, we're talking about the United States, but this is the case in many other countries too. They open their homes to care for each other's children. They make up for the gaps in the system by creating wonderful home-based childcare programs. So we're talking about 1 or 2 people who care for a small group of children in their homes. It's neighborhood-based. It's the primary source of care for our very youngest children, our infants and our toddlers. It's the primary source of care for parents that don't work 9 to 5, that work evenings and weekends, and for parents that have challenges and burdens around transportation, for example, or other challenges in accessing care. But it's also a wonderful source of care for families overall who want an intimate, nurturing setting. During the pandemic, we've heard many parents feel safer with family childcare. And yet, the policies and funding that we do have in place for childcare, which is limited to start with, as we've said, really those policies often leave out family childcare completely. So in a system that is already broken, this incredibly important source of childcare is overlooked and ignored.
And how does All Our Kin come in there? And what's the first step you do?
Yeah, so first let me talk about the women who are providing this care in their homes, because these women are incredible teachers, leaders, and business people. And they've been doing this work. They did this work before All Our Kin got here, and they did it with so little recognition and support. The thing that we did at All Our Kin was to say, why is no one supporting these educators? Why are we not offering them the most wonderful training, the latest knowledge about child development, the most finely honed business skills, opportunities for advocacy and systems design? Why are we not doing everything to champion and support these educators? So we have built, working closely with family childcare educators across the country, a really strong, responsive, holistic model for helping educators set up these businesses, helping them deliver high quality programming that's rooted in the latest of what we know about brain development and what children need to thrive and to be successful, which includes empathy and leadership and grit and all those important things. And we help them succeed as business people and entrepreneurs. So give them the tools to begin to build wealth and really understand their businesses. That's the All Our Kin model. And we've shown that we can transform the supply of care, the quality of care, and educators' earnings and well-being by doing that. In fact, every dollar we invest in supporting these programs delivers a return of $15 to $20 in regional economic benefits because of educators' earnings and parents' earnings.
Thank you, Jessica. And I also read that, you know, for every 4 to 5 parents, for every new family childcare business, you have 4 to 5 parents go to work. So there is a direct lever there. Let me ask you sort of on the question of income and economics surrounding the business. Childcare, early childcare in the US and places like DC can easily cost a couple of $1,000s a month, which you know, is just unaffordable for many of us from the get-go. So how do you match you know, the small business demands of the entrepreneur with what parents can offer to pay and can afford to pay?
Yeah, so that is where the absence of public funding and a public system becomes glaringly important, you know, and glaringly obvious. We have some choices to make as a society about how we value families and how we value early childhood educators. So, you know, we know that for families, childcare in the United States, if they have a small child, it's usually their single biggest expense. That can drive families over the brink. It can keep parents out of the workforce. It costs more often to send a child to childcare than it does to pay for in-state college tuition, right? It's not sustainable. So that's not a fair burden to place on families. At the same time, we know that early childhood educators are incredibly underpaid, earning poverty level wages in many cases. 98% of the professions in the United States pay more than childcare. And, you know, there's a really ugly history behind that. our childcare system in the United States is historically built on exploiting the unpaid and underpaid labor of Black and brown women. And that's how we've permitted ourselves to justify this inequitable, unjustifiable system. So when we think about affordability for families and compensation for educators, we can talk about those as though they're in opposition. They're really part of the same thing, which is creating a publicly funded system that makes it possible for families to pay for care and makes it possible for educators to earn fair wages for their very important work.
And thank you for laying this out so clearly. And my follow-up question to that is, what are you seeing is possible on the horizon? Biden could not get his proposal through, so there are other creative ideas being discussed right now, like tagging it to funding for the industry, so make it a precondition that companies set up childcare if they want to tap into federal funding. So what gives you, or are there reasons that make you hopeful that the picture is changing?
Yeah, so there are reasons that I'm hopeful, and those are twofold. The first is, while we have not seen the action that we had hoped for at the federal level, we are seeing action at the state level. We are seeing state lawmakers taking immediate and drastic action to better compensate educators and supply families. And I'll just give you two examples, but there are examples across the country. So in Washington, D.C., the city council voted to allot $14,000 to every childcare educator in Washington, D.C. as an interim measure so that they could keep doing this work that they love while they move towards paying something closer to the true cost of care. So that's in motion. It's happening. It's an inspiration to all of us across the country. Meanwhile, in New Mexico, voters actually voted on a constitutional amendment that made early childhood education a constitutional right. So on the affordability side, we see immediate action to give families access to care. So those kinds of bright spots give me a lot of hope. The second reason is connected to that. Elliot Haskell, who's a policymaker and theoretician in this area, wrote a recent piece that said childcare support is sky high. Everyone in the United States knows we want it, but it's soft as butter. It's no one's make or break issue. I believe that is going to change. I believe that as we move towards economic recovery, more and more Americans will recognize that economic recovery is not possible without childcare. And at that point, it will become a make or break issue for all of us. And if I may just add one example, I'm in Connecticut right now, and I'm coming from a rally, one of many across our state, where parents and early childhood educators and business leaders have taken to the streets as part of what they are calling a morning without childcare to demand childcare as something that all of us need collectively if we are going to thrive as a society.
Thank you, Jessica, for sharing that. And my question would be, do you think the pandemic has led to more appreciation for the role that childcare plays in our society?
Yeah, there is no question that the pandemic brought childcare literally into people's living rooms, right? As we saw parents struggling to care for their young children and do their jobs. We also saw the incredibly heroic efforts and the heroic role that childcare educators played to stay open and support children and families so that, for example, frontline workers like healthcare workers could go to work. We even saw the ways in which they supported families who couldn't send their children to care, dropping off books and materials, reading stories to children over the phone, right? We saw all those things. There is a new recognition of that role, and yet somehow we have yet as a society to truly honor and reward and support the sacrifices that educators made and continue to make.
Mm. Do you see a shift in how companies behave, that they are becoming more accommodating?
That's a great question. I don't think there's a unilateral action answer. I definitely see some companies and certainly some business leaders who are becoming very outspoken about the need for childcare and are in fact looking to partner with organizations like All Our Kin, or looking to invest in and support childcare in a number of ways. We see other companies who have not taken action. So I don't feel like I can make a sweeping statement about this response.
Yeah. And to the question around, like, it's International Women's Day, to the question around gender equity, you said, at the beginning that it's mostly a women's, it's still mostly a women's issue, if I understood you correctly. Can you draw that out a little bit more, and also perhaps speak to, are you seeing any changes over the last year or two?
Yeah, so it's a women's issue in two ways. The first is that we know that women are the hardest hit when families do not have access to childcare. Women still take that hit and bear that responsibility. We know that lack of access to childcare keeps women out of the workforce. And in fact, the time that women lose when they're out of the workforce costs them on average $600,000 over their lifetimes, because once they leave, it's so difficult to catch up. The pandemic made that much worse. We saw so many women leave the workforce, and we are still not back to where we were before the pandemic. So there are 217,000 less women in the workforce now than in February of 2020. That's compared to 1.3 million more men in the workforce. So this has really hurt women's participation in the workforce and continues to do so. And in terms of what we're seeing now, is that we're still not back to where we were, which was already not a great place. So that's one important piece of the issue. The other is that the childcare workforce is overwhelmingly women, right? And we know that women's labor has historically been undervalued. And we see that in the poverty level wages that educators are paid. It's notable that early childhood educators are 8 times more likely to be receiving poverty level wages than their peers in K through 12, who are really doing the same work. And I think some of that has to do with gender and with gender equity. I think there's a growing recognition of that disparity. Again, we're right on the cusp where I'm really hoping that maybe this is the moment where that disparity coalesces into action. And certainly the incredibly powerful women that are part of All Our Kin's family childcare network, that are speaking, that are advocating, that are telling their stories and showing what is possible, I think are really leaders in that movement and in helping to make that change possible.
Thank you, Jessica. A quick note to the audience, start sending us your question. We're going to be opening the Q&A session soon. In the meantime, Jessica, you were mentioning the women, the educators who are, carrying, forming the basis of All Our Kin. I watched, the videos on your website, went through your material, and these are incredibly strong, professional, highly qualified women that you help getting even, more qualifications and more sort of official recognition through certificates, etc. So tell a bit more about how that works, and perhaps also sort of is there a typical way how these women come into the profession, or is there not?
Yeah, so before I get there, I realized I didn't really talk about All Our Kin's scope, which might be helpful framing for this conversation. So All Our Kin began in New Haven, Connecticut, and has expanded since to multiple cities in Connecticut and New York City. We work directly with about 1,000 family childcare educators who reach about 6,000 children. But because our model's impacts, again, on quality, supply, and sustainability have been so strong, we've been working with partners across the country to replicate that model. So we are now in 23 states and working with over 5,000 family childcare educators who are reaching over 40,000 children. So when I talk about family childcare educators, I'm talking about women leaders across the United States in all types of settings. And I will tell you, every one of them is extraordinary. They come to us at different points in their journey. But let's talk about someone who comes to All Our Kin at the very beginning and goes all the way through, right? So this is typically someone, maybe they're a parent or a grandparent, maybe they're an aunt who's always cared for the children. And go. And these women realize that they're providing an invaluable service and that they can actually build a business and create a sustainable resource for their community. So they come to All Our Kin, and the first thing we help them do is set up that business, get the curriculum in place, meet their state's licensing requirements, do all the foundational training to open their program as a formal, small, in-home childcare business, and as importantly, become part of a professional community with other educators who can mentor and support them as they embark upon this work. Because being part of a professional community is something that we all need, and especially adults who are alone with children all day, right? This is how we thrive and grow and are nourished, so we can nourish children in turn. We then support our educators as teachers. We deliver high-touch coaching that's based on the best of what we know, both of how children learn, but also how adults learn. Learning should be loving, fun, joyful, hands-on, interactive, research-based. Everything we want educators to deliver, we want to model and deliver that too. So we do that through coaching in programs, but also group professional learning on all kinds of topics that educators need to understand, which range from child development to family engagement to recently a really sophisticated knowledge of mental health and some of the crises that children and families are experiencing. And next, because educators are also running businesses, we train them to really understand all aspects of that business, which can be quite complex, from cash flow to marketing to, what you can deduct on your taxes and dividing out business and personal expenses. That kind of training is incredibly empowering. It gives educators the chance to earn more, significantly more than they can without that training, and begin to build the wealth that they deserve for this work. Again, we can't fix a broken funding system, but we can help educators work within it and earn the most that they possibly can. And that also means that these incredible childcare businesses will stay open, which is really, really important for children and families. So those are the key pieces of the work that we do. The last piece that we do that kind of surrounds all those other pieces is to connect with all the other stakeholders in a community and really ensure that family childcare educators are respected, have a voice, and are helping shape the systems that affect them and children and families so profoundly.
That's a great segue to a question I'm seeing on the chat. So I want to paraphrase it. The question is around sort of talking about childcare providers as early childhood educators or as children's first teachers. I'm imagining that is linked to what you were just saying, upping the profession and giving the respect that is deserved. But I don't want to put words into your mouth. So let us know what you think.
Yeah, I mean, you'll notice that mostly through this conversation, I have used this term educator, and that is deliberate That is the word that our family childcare educators have asked that we use, because education is in fact what they are doing. They are, as I have said earlier, literally building children's brains. What they are doing with children in their program every day lays the foundation for children's cognitive development, children's social and emotional development, and for what we call executive function, the ability to make a plan and work towards that plan, change the plan if it doesn't work, follow directions, empathy, leadership. You know, if we care about the kind of humans who are going to be leading our country 20, 30 years from now, we have to think about what they're learning in the earliest years, because those are absolutely foundational experiences that are going to define the kinds of humans that they become. And so speaking about the earliest years as education, I think is really, really important. And I just want to be crystal clear on this, because I do not want to be misunderstood. Education can happen in any setting. It can happen in a childcare center. It can happen in a family childcare. It can happen at home with parents or grandparents. So when I say education, I don't mean that you have to learn in a group setting, but a group setting can be a very wonderful and special place to learn.
Thank you, Jessica. There is one question here on the chat. How do you ensure that the childcare settings are safe and supported? So,
yeah. So that's a great question. And I love that it's a two-part question, safe and supported. That's really smart. So we can ensure at All Our Kin that those settings are supported, that those educators are getting everything that they need to thrive and deliver wonderful, nurturing, safe care to children. It is the job of the state to make sure that those programs are safe. And so the state has oversight over childcare, and that distinction is important because it is hard to provide loving support and monitoring at the same time. That being said, we actually partnered with the Yale School of Medicine to do a completely randomized study of health and safety violations across the state of Connecticut of family childcare educators that were or were not affiliated with All Our Kin. And guess what? If you were getting supports from All Our Kin, you were much less likely to have a health or safety violation. Why? Because support is what leads to programs being safe.
Yeah, I'm not surprised about that. Another question here from the chat. Are there male teachers who are currently opening their homes to care for children? And if so, do we need to make this fact more visible to the public?
Yeah, so certainly there is a hugely important role for men in early childhood education overall, and for men, you know, to feel empowered to be caregivers, and for children to see men in these loving, nurturing roles. In family childcare, it's usually women. When we see men, and again, this is our limited All Our Kin data set, it's not perfect, but for the most part, what we see in these cases are husband and wife teams, which is a really beautiful model and kind of extension of the family. That is mostly where we see men in family childcare. But I think you're right, for men to know that they are welcomed into the space of caregiving and early care and education is really, really important.
Thank you. I'm getting to another question in the chat to ensure we can still cover them all. There's the question, what strategies can be proposed to develop childcare in other countries, especially in countries where women are systematically marginalized, demarginalized?
Yeah,
perhaps add to that, what can the US also learn from other countries?
Yeah, absolutely. So certainly the United States has a lot to learn from countries that have invested in childcare, that have taken childcare seriously, and have actually put money behind supporting childcare teachers and making it possible for families to access care. But we also have been in conversation at All Our Kin with leaders of nonprofits not all that different from ours in other countries that have not supported their childcare systems. And we find that many of the strategies that are emerging there are pretty similar to our own. That is, seek out the leaders on the ground, the women who are doing this work already, and then do everything possible, both to support them in real time in creating and sustaining their programs, and to support them as advocates and really work together with them towards systems change. That is the strategy that we have seen. And it's something that we're really excited to partner with folks around the globe on. So if you're doing work like this in your country or thinking about it, please reach out. We'd love to speak with you.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And this is the last question to wrap things up. It's about the role of grandparents. And I think implicit in this question is the observation that, the breakup of the extended family makes childcare more and more challenging. So have you, from your bird's eye perspective, any observations to share about the role of seniors, of grandparents in early childcare and family childcare education?
Yeah, I mean, I know so many powerful stories of grandparents who have been really foundational and transformational in their children's, in their grandchildren's lives. Sometimes that means essentially taking on an extension of the parental role when the parent cannot play that role, right? And we've seen the many ways in which grandparents can love and nurture children. You need one stable, supportive, nurturing adult in your life. That person doesn't have to be a parent, although of course it's wonderful if it is. It can be a grandparent, it can be someone else. We also see in many cases that grandparents open family childcare programs. So I know firsthand stories of many grandparents who say, you know what, my children are working. I'm going to care for my grandchildren during the day. And I am so overflowing with care and love and knowledge that I'm going to open up my home and take in other kids as well. And in doing so, they transform their whole neighborhoods. And it's amazing to watch.
Thank you so much, Jessica. We are on time, over time slightly, but that was beautiful, really empowering. Everyone in the chat, you can see some links with follow-up resources. Reach out to all our kin if you want to get more involved. And Jessica, thanks again for coming to us on this important and symbolic day, and all the best for you and all our kin. We'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a good day. Bye.